Hello again, and welcome to Lessons from the Table. My name is Matt Carroll. Today I want to talk about something a little bit interesting, something that I just kind of discovered of my own accord. This wasn't like any particular, I applied some knowledge from another DM kind of thing. This is just a concept that I've kind of worked on in my own time. And it relates to something called the brain in the jar, and hopefully, unless I do something really dumb, that'll be the title of this video. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the concept of the brain in a jar, it basically states that everything that comes to our brain, every sensation we feel, every bit of input is just an electrical signal that our brain interprets. Everything we see, everything we touch, everything we smell and taste, it's just electrical signals to the brain, right? This, like, me touching my own hand isn't really me touching my own hand, it's just the electrical signal in my brain of my hand touching my hand. So, for example, if I reach my hand out and touch a wooden table, there's nothing to actually prove that I have reached out and touched a table. It could just be that something is feeding my brain the electrical signal of my clothes shifting across my skin as my arm extends, the signal of my muscles expanding and contracting as they move, the sensation of my skin touching the table. That could all just be sensory information being delivered directly to a brain that is making it believe that reality is real. It basically states that you could theoretically be a brain in a jar on a desk, receiving the very specific necessary electrical inputs to make it seem as though reality exists. So how does this apply to Dungeons & Dragons? This isn't a metaphorical this isn't a metaphorical... What am I even trying to say? This isn't a philosophical video. This is a very practical thing as far as I'm concerned. Also, the whole world is shaking. That seems to have stopped now. Not sure what was going on there. So how does this relate to Dungeons & Dragons? Basically, your players are the brain in the jar, and you are whatever is giving it the electrical signals. Your players only know what you tell them about the world. If the brain doesn't receive an electrical signal of a hand touching a table, there is no hand, and there is no table. So you can decide what it is your players do and don't know about the world. Why is this important? Well, let's give an example. This was towards the end of my first campaign that I ran. At this point, things were taking place in the Underdark. I had a very particular kind of monster. This isn't about tier 3 play. Most of the party was about... in fact, all of the party, they were level 11 at this point. So this is in tier 3 play. And I had a monster called a cloaking spider that was invisible. It had blind sight, it had tremor sense, it had no reason to not be invisible. It wasn't a temporary or limited use thing. It could be invisible all the time if it needed, except when it injected venom. At that point, it needed to uncloak. And my players had to go do something completely unrelated. And then they were ambushed by cloaking spiders. This is the first time they fought them. It was tough. It was very nearly a dangerous thing. Now, what actually happened is I designed and balanced the combat very specifically that these spiders were going to get the drop on the party. They are ambush predators. And there was nothing in particular that the party did that suggested that they should find these before they got attacked, right? They did make perception checks. One of them was like, I want to look around. Do I see anything? There was a really high DC to spot an invisible spider that the party, by rights, didn't even know existed. So they got ambushed and very nearly died. If it weren't for the fact that a couple of them passed a particular kind of save, they would have all died. And the reason there is a save involved in that is there's something very specific about these spiders. They eat minerals in rocks. Their saliva breaks down rocks into constituent minerals, which the spiders then eat as nutrients. When they're eating organic matter, they inject venom that petrifies the organic matter, and they then begin dissolving it and eating it. That is how they work. So the party, a bunch of them, failed their constitution saves. They got petrified. There was no way for them to, continue making successive saves. That was how these were designed. They were designed to be very dangerous and very deadly. A lot of the time, I'll design things that if it's a save, you make a save on a subsequent turn. And I'll touch on this a little bit later, but I do think that's important. I think just, save or suck is generally a bad idea. This is one of the very few times I've deployed it. And a couple of party members survived. They barely got out of that combat. And then the very next thing they had to do, the very next quest they were tasked with, involved finding a bunch of rare materials, some of which was the venom from these cloaking spiders. Specifically, they had to find enough to fill 5 vials, which meant incapacitating 5 cloaking spiders. So the first time they walked through the Underdark, before they got ambushed by these spiders, I described what they were seeing. I described the Underdark as far as they could tell. And this is, with dark vision and things like that could maybe help. Not perfect, doesn't mean you can see infinitely, but they were in a large cavernous space with some peculiar bowl-shaped rock formations with a soft glow coming from the middle of them. It turned out that soft glow was something called moon water that they also needed to be collecting later on down the line. There was various fungi around. Some of the rocks had like a light moss on them. And that was really all the information I gave them. The second time they headed out, specifically trying to find these cloaking spiders, I told the ranger things that they would now know. Because the ranger is a ranger. They encounter a creature, and after that they learn a little bit about how it works, and they understand practically how that creature must exist within the world. And that means they start to understand the creature a little bit better, know thy enemy and all that. So I told the ranger the second time they were heading out, I told them that they were spotting peculiar marks on rocks where it looked like they'd been corroded away. Now that wasn't something this person noticed the first time around, because they kind of had no cause to. You'd have to be really looking close. But the second time around, the character would know what they were looking for. They would know by that point that cloaking spiders eat by dissolving rocks. So he wanted to look for bits where the rocks were dissolved. And the reason this is important, the reason I told the player this, is the player doesn't necessarily think of this. Some players do, but others don't. And you shouldn't punish players for not thinking of something like that. What you should do is give them that little morsel of information. And you'll often find from that point the player will run with it. They'll go, I wonder if that has anything to do with the cloaking spiders. Could I roll a nature check here? Can I see if I can get more information about this? Is there maybe a particular pattern? I go, yeah, sure. And they roll a check, and I'm like, you notice that this seems to be, a particular cluster of it, and suggests that this may have been a feeding ground for cloaking spiders. And suddenly, they're starting to understand a bit of a pattern of behavior of these creatures. Suddenly, it is feasible that this ranger can track a creature that before they were only prey to. Suddenly, they are now the predator. And the reason this happened is because I, the DM, fed them information that they would now have. Information that I deprived them of earlier because the characters would not have had it. But after encountering the cloaking spiders, someone like a ranger would have this information. Your player is a brain in a jar, and they only have a perception of reality that is the one you, the DM, give them. This is a very powerful tool. Here's another example. Let's say your characters are traveling from point A to point B. Let's say point B is a desert. Point A is an outpost on the edge of it. The outpost, it's dry, it's arid, it's not great, it's plainsland maybe, and maybe they've left in autumn. There's a little bit of rain coming back in, but it's still on the drier side. Things are still recovering somewhat from summer. You could tell them, you walk through the desert for 2 days until you come to the next town. Or you could tell them, as you pass across the landscape, the grass gives way to red rock and dust. The wind, unfettered by geographic boundaries and barriers, whips across you, kicking dust up that bites at your shins and ankles. Any part of your skin that isn't covered is battered like 1,000 stinging needles. The sun beats down unrelenting, Cloudless is the sky, and so there is nothing to block the sun's unrelenting rays. It's dry, it's hot. Every time you exhale, you feel a little bit thirstier. As night begins to fall, you're still a few hours away from your destination, and the temperature drops as fast as the sun. As soon as its last rays of light have left the sky, suddenly the wind that whipped hot now bites at your skin, still carrying the same hot earth and dust, but now it's more like white hot pinpricks, like a needle over a fire, jabbing your exposed flesh, and everything else is frigidly cold. And after an hour of that, you finally arrive at your destination, thankful to be away from the elements. My players only have the perception of reality that I give them in my world. I can say you walk through the desert and you arrive there at night, and they can fill in the blanks, or I can fill in those blanks for them. I can give them as much or as little sensory information as possible. And I can use that to mechanical effect, as in the first example with the ranger and the cloaking spiders, or I can use it for story. I can use it for flavor. I can use it to deepen and enrich the world. Now, I think in general it's a good idea for DMs to describe as much as possible. I think it really increases immersion. I think don't do it to the detriment of play happening at a good pace. But that's one way you can make travel happen without just having, you go from here and you arrive at here, which is like a one sentence, few second thing. Instead, you can make it a minute or two of you describing the area that they're passing through. You can get as vivid or not as you like. You can tell them about the sensations on their characters' skins. You can tell them about the smells, the tastes, the sounds. It's often considered good writing to do that in the world of fiction writing. They're called sensory markers. Sorry, concrete markers, rather. Things that interact with the senses. The smell, the touch, the taste, the sound. And, of course, the sight. And we're very good at describing sight. We always are. And when we tell someone desert, we know what a desert looks like. But we can get specific, can't we? Soft, rolling, shifting dunes of blonde sand. Or jagged bluffs of dry red rock with shrubs sprouting stubbornly from beneath the cracks. Those are two completely different places, but they're both deserts. I can give more detail and make a more vivid picture. I can give a specific kind of desert. But the player only has what I give them. They are a brain in a jar, and I give them every bit of sensory input they will ever receive. Use that. It'll really change your game. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in to Lessons from the Table. I've been Matt Carroll, and I will see you next time.